Oliver Cromwell. For many in England, a hero of the Republic, a brilliant general, the Lord Protector who defied a king. An austere figure perhaps, but just a man of God. But cross the Irish Sea and that name, that name evokes something entirely different. It's not a hero you find in Irish memory, it's a spectre. A byword for massacre, famine, theft, and a brutality so profound that its scars still mark the landscape and soul of that island. Today, we're not going to talk about glorious parliamentary victories or the complexities of the English Civil War as seen from London. We're going to delve into one of the darkest and most controversial chapters in British and Irish history. The Cromwellian conquest of Ireland between 1649 and 1653. Forget the simplistic narratives. Prepare for the mud, the blood, the smoke, and the smell of death. Because Cromwell's civilizing mission in Ireland was written with iron, fire, and tears. Historical context. To understand the horror that was to come, we need to go back a bit. Ireland in the mid-17th century was a simmering cauldron. The Irish Rebellion of 1641, initiated by dispossessed Irish Catholics, fearful of increasing English and Scottish Protestant domination, led to years of brutal and complex warfare, the Irish Confederate Wars. Confederate Catholics, Royalists, loyal to King Charles I, English parliamentary forces, Scottish Presbyterian settlers, all fought for control of the island. Then, in January 1649, something seismic happened in London. Charles I was executed. England became a commonwealth, a republic led by Parliament. And in Ireland, yesterday's enemies, Catholic Confederates and Protestant Royalists, formed an uneasy alliance, united by their horror at the king's execution and their fear of the new Puritan regime. They proclaimed the executed king's son, Charles II, as King of Ireland. For the English Parliament, now under the dominant influence of Cromwell and the New Model Army, this was intolerable. A united Ireland under Royalist command was a direct threat to the newborn Commonwealth. But the motivations went beyond politics. There was a desire for revenge for the atrocities, both real and exaggerated by propaganda, committed against Protestant settlers in 1641. There was financial pressure. Parliament owed fortunes to adventurers who lent money to subjugate Ireland in exchange for promises of confiscated lands. And, crucially, there was religious ideology. For Cromwell and his Puritans, Ireland was a stronghold of popery, a heresy to be crushed. Irish Catholics were seen by many, including Cromwell, as barbarians needing civilization, a convenient justification for conquest and subjugation. Before we witness the landing of the troops that would change Ireland forever, reflect, what do you know about Cromwell in Ireland? Is it a story often told in detail in history classes outside of Ireland? If you believe that history should be confronted, even in its most brutal moments, leave a like. Subscribe if you want to continue uncovering these inconvenient truths. And comment, what historical event shocked you the most when you discovered the less heroic version of the facts? Share your experiences. Now, brace yourself. The storm is reaching the Irish coast. August 1649. The situation for the parliamentary forces in Ireland seemed desperate. Only Dublin held out, a small enclave commanded by Colonel Michael Jones. Outside, a combined force of Royalists and Confederates under the Marquis of Ormond prepared for the final blow. But Ormond hesitated, and Jones, in a stroke of audacity at the Battle of Rathmines, attacked first, shattering the enemy army. Cromwell, receiving the news in England, called it An astonishing mercy. Astonishing indeed. The path was clear. On the 15th of August, 1649, Oliver Cromwell landed near Dublin with a formidable force. The new model army, hardened veterans of the English civil wars, well equipped, disciplined, and imbued with a religious fervour that bordered on fanaticism. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to conquer. Cromwell's first strategic target was Drogheda, a fortified port town north of Dublin. The garrison, a mix of English Royalist and Irish Confederate soldiers under the command of Sir Arthur Aston, an experienced English Catholic, numbered about 3,000 men. Cromwell besieged the town, and after days of relentless bombardment, his troops breached the walls. He demanded surrender. Aston refused. What followed would go down in the annals of infamy. On the 11th of September, the parliamentary troops stormed the town. Cromwell gave the fateful order: no quarter, no mercy. What unfolded was a massacre. Soldiers were killed even after surrendering. Hundreds who sought refuge in St. Peter's Church were burned alive when soldiers set fire to the tower and roof. The sound of muskets, the clang of steel, the screams of the dying, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic odour of blood and the smoke of fires. It was hell on earth. Aston, the commander, was reportedly beaten to death with his own wooden leg. It's estimated that nearly 3,500 people, the vast majority of the garrison and hundreds of civilians, including priests, were killed. Cromwell justified the carnage as a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches, and as a way to terrorise other garrisons into swift surrender, saving English blood. A cold, brutal logic that would echo for centuries. The tactic of terror continued. The army marched south to the port of Wexford, known for harbouring privateers who attacked English ships. During surrender negotiations, Cromwell's troops stormed the town. The result was another massacre, the sack of Wexford. Approximately 2,000 soldiers and 1,500 civilians were killed. Many drowned in the harbour while trying to escape in boats. The town was plundered and burned. Although some historians debate whether Cromwell directly ordered the Wexford massacre, as he did in Drogheda, or if his troops acted on their own in the confusion, the outcome was the same: terror, death, and destruction. The message was clear. Resistance would be crushed without mercy. The fall of the fortified towns didn't mean the end of the war. Quite the opposite. As the new model army advanced inland, Irish resistance transformed. Organised armies gave way to a brutal guerrilla war fought by the Toraith, dispossessed men, scattered soldiers, fighting in small bands in the forests and bogs. They attacked supply convoys, ambushed small patrols, disappearing into the landscape they knew so well. Cromwell and his commander's response was equally relentless. A scorched earth policy. Villages were burned, cattle were slaughtered, crops were systematically destroyed. The goal was to deny any sustenance or shelter to the guerrillas and the civilian population who supported them. The sound now wasn't just muskets, but the crackling of flames consuming homes and barns, the desperate lowing of slaughtered cattle, the sinister silence of fields that should have been full of life. The deliberate destruction of food, combined with the disruption of agriculture by war and possibly adverse weather conditions, had an inevitable and devastating consequence: famine. A famine that swept through Ireland with terrible ferocity. Accounts from the time speak of people eating grass, leaves, and even corpses. Entire villages were decimated, not by the sword, but by starvation. And, as if famine weren't enough, then came the plague. Outbreaks of bubonic plague, intensified by malnutrition, and population displacement claimed even more lives. The smell of disease and death hung over the land. It's estimated that between the war, famine, and plague, Ireland lost anywhere from 15% to perhaps even a third of its pre-war population. A demographic catastrophe of terrifying proportions. But the conquest wasn't just military. It was about reshaping Irish society itself. Even before the war ended, the English Parliament began implementing what became known as the Cromwellian settlement. The foundation was the Act for the Settlement of Ireland of 1652. Under this Act, vast tracts of land belonging to Irish Catholic landowners, accused in varying degrees of participation in the rebellion since 1641, were confiscated. To whom were these lands given? To the English adventurers who financed the war, and to the soldiers of the new model army as payment for their services. What happened to the dispossessed Catholic landowners? Those who weren't killed or didn't flee received an infamous order to hell or to Connacht. Connacht, the westernmost province, was considered the poorest and most infertile land in Ireland. Thousands of Catholic families, including women, children, and the elderly, were forced to abandon their ancestral homes and march west, often in winter, with few belongings. Imagine the scene. The icy mud under bare feet, the biting wind, the cries of children, the vacant stare of adults, leaving behind everything they knew for an uncertain future in an unknown and hostile land. It was a large-scale ethnic and social cleansing, destroying the old Gaelic and Anglo-Norman Catholic landowning class and cementing the dominance of a new English Protestant elite. And for those deemed vagrants, captured soldiers, priests, or simply orphans and widows left behind by war and famine, there was another fate: deportation. Thousands of Irish men, women, and children were forcibly rounded up, held in terrible conditions in makeshift dungeons or enclosures. The sound of groans and the stench of overcrowding were constant. Then they were loaded onto slave ships. Yes, slave ships. And transported across the Atlantic to the English colonies in the West Indies, primarily Barbados and Montserrat. There they were sold as indentured servants, in practice white slaves, condemned to years of brutal labour on sugar plantations under a scorching sun. The waves crashing against the ship's hull were not a sound of adventure, but the funereal rhythm of a journey of no return for many, a slow death sentence under the lash and tropical disease. The cruel irony of the civilizing mission revealed itself in its most inhumane form, civilizing the Irish barbarians by turning them into disposable property on the other side of the world. The Cromwellian conquest officially ended in 1653, but its consequences echo to this day. The social and agrarian structure of Ireland was radically transformed. The religious and political division was deepened, creating wounds that would take centuries to begin to heal. The memory of the massacres, famine, confiscations, and deportations became an integral part of Irish identity and its complex, often painful, relationship with England. Cromwell, the Puritan hero, remains in Ireland as the archetype of the ruthless oppressor. This isn't an easy story to tell or to hear, but it's crucial because understanding the shadows of the past, however dark they may be, is the only way to truly comprehend the present. What did you feel hearing this story? Does the brutality justified in the name of religion and politics still resonate today? What other dark chapter of history deserves to be brought to light? Share your reflections in the comments. If you believe in the importance of confronting these difficult narratives, subscribe. There are the 3rd of September, 1658, a fateful date. Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, the man who overthrew a king, conquered Ireland with an iron fist, and ruled England, Scotland, and Ireland as an uncrowned monarch, dies. A giant is gone, and with him perhaps the very soul of the English Republic. The man who personified strength, will, and divine authority, at least in his own mind, left an immense void. What now? Who would hold the reins of this turbulent experiment called the Commonwealth? The official answer came quickly. His eldest surviving son, Richard Cromwell. But who was Richard? A quiet country gentleman, more interested in hunting and tranquility than in the brutal power games his father mastered. He lacked the military experience, the natural authority, and the religious fervour that sustained Oliver. It was like replacing a lion with a well-intentioned lamb in an arena full of hungry wolves. The question hanging in the charged London air wasn't whether the regime would survive, but for how long. Before we witness the collapse of this republic, built at such great cost and blood, let's pause. Have you ever heard of Richard Cromwell, the forgotten Lord Protector? If you think power transitions are rarely smooth, especially after such dominant figures, leave a like. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chaotic chapters of history. And comment, in your opinion, what's harder, building a new regime or keeping it standing after its founder's death? We want to know your perspective. Now, buckle up. The fall will be swift and confusing. Richard Cromwell assumed the title of Lord Protector. On paper, he had the same powers as his father. In practice, he inherited a mountain of problems and very little authority to solve them. The first major problem, the army. The new model army, the war machine that put his father in power, looked at Richard with suspicion. He had never commanded in battle, never smelled gunpowder like them. Ambitious generals like Charles Fleetwood, his brother-in-law, and John Lambert saw him as a weak, manipulable figure or simply an obstacle to their own ambitions. The sound of military boots marching in the barracks seemed more threatening than reassuring to the new protector. The second problem. The treasury was empty. Oliver's wars, the upkeep of the army, the administration, all were expensive. The debt was colossal, estimated at £2 million, an astronomical fortune. To try and resolve this, Richard's Privy Council did what seemed logical. They convened a parliament in January 1659. But here was the trap. To try and gain legitimacy, they used the older, broader electoral system, which allowed for the election of a multitude of moderate Presbyterians who never fully accepted the radical Puritan regime, crypto-royalists longing for the monarchy, and a noisy group of hardline Republicans who thought the Protectorate was already a betrayal of the good old cause of the Republic. The result? Parliamentary chaos. Instead of voting on funds, Parliament got lost in endless debates. They discussed the legitimacy of Richard's own position, questioned the existence of the other house, a sort of Senate created by Oliver, seen as an imitation of the hated House of Lords, and attacked the army's power. The air in Westminster Palace was not one of cooperation, but of suspicion and mutual hostility. The sound was of fiery speeches, veiled accusations, and political paralysis setting in. The tension between the civilian parliament and the militaristic army reached a boiling point. Parliament tried to assert its authority over the armed forces, questioning appointments, and even attempting to prosecute a major general for actions against a royalist. For the army commanders, this was intolerable. They hadn't fought a bloody civil war only to now be ordered around by a bunch of chatty civilians and a Lord Protector with no backbone. In April 1659, the army acted. They staged a show of force in London, surrounding Westminster. The message was clear. Richard, caught between a rock and a hard place, with no real support from either side and clearly no stomach for a confrontation, caved to military pressure and dissolved Parliament. But in doing so, he signed his own political death warrant. Without Parliament, he was merely a puppet in the hands of the generals. In May 1659, less than 9 months after taking office, Richard Cromwell, the second and last Lord Protector of England, formally resigned. He simply didn't have the grit, cunning, or ruthlessness needed to navigate the turbulent waters of post-revolutionary politics. Ironically nicknamed Tumbledown Dick, he faded into obscurity, a brief and inglorious chapter in English history. With Richard out of the way, who was in charge now? Nobody knew for sure. The army, or rather, the various factions within it, tried to fill the void. They brought back the Rump Parliament, that remnant of the Long Parliament that Oliver had expelled years earlier. But the relationship was tense. Generals and parliamentarians distrusted each other. General Lambert, after crushing a royalist uprising, felt powerful enough to expel the Rump again and create a Committee of Safety controlled by the army. England was, in practice, under an unstable military dictatorship, without a strong central figure like Oliver to impose order. The country was exhausted. Tired of instability, tired of the Puritan saints' government with its rigid rules, tired of the generals and their power games, tired of high taxes to support an army many now saw as oppressive. The initial Republican fervour had dissipated, replaced by a growing desire for order, stability, and, for many, the return of something familiar: the monarchy. The sound on the streets was no longer one of revolutionary fervour, but of murmurs of discontent, uncertainty, and, increasingly, nostalgia for an idealised past. And then, from the north, a decisive figure emerged: George Monk. An experienced, pragmatic and enigmatic general, he commanded the Commonwealth forces in Scotland. Monk observed the chaos in London with growing alarm. He was a professional soldier, loyal to the idea of order and stability above all else. Seeing the collapse of the central government and Lambert's rise, Monk decided to act. In October 1659, he began marching his army south toward London. Nobody knew exactly what his intentions were. He was a master at keeping his cards close to his chest. Would he be a new military dictator? A defender of Parliament? Or something else? Monk's march was the catalyst. Lambert's troops, demoralised and unpaid, began to desert. Support for the military regime in London evaporated. When Monk arrived in London in February 1660, he was the man of the moment, the arbiter of England's destiny. With surprising political skill, he restored the moderate Presbyterian members who had been expelled from Parliament years earlier, the reassembled Long Parliament, knowing they were more favourable to a monarchical solution. This Parliament then voted for its own dissolution and called new elections for a Convention Parliament. Meanwhile, in exile on the continent, Charles Stuart, the son of the executed king, bided his time. Advised by moderate figures, he issued the Declaration of Breda in April 1660. In it, he promised pardon for most of those who fought against his father, with the exception of the direct regicides, religious toleration, a promise that would only be partially fulfilled, payment of the army's arrears, and respect for land ownership. This was exactly what the Convention Parliament, now dominated by monarchists and moderates, wanted to hear. The declaration was accepted with enthusiasm. Parliament voted that the government of England should be by King, Lords, and Commons. The Republic was officially dead. On May 29, 1660, his 30th birthday, Charles II entered London. The Restoration was a reality. And the reception? Ecstatic. After years of Puritan austerity, civil war, political instability, and military rule, the population erupted in celebration. The streets were packed, adorned with tapestries. Bells rang incessantly. Bonfires were lit. Wine flowed from fountains. The sound was one of unbridled joy, of relief, of a collective desire to turn the page and return to normalcy even, if that normalcy was that of a monarchy which had been overthrown with so much bloodshed just a decade earlier. The contrast with Cromwell's sombre funeral was absolute. The nation that had executed a king now welcomed his son with open arms. And so ended the interregnum, England's brief, turbulent, and bloody republican experiment. Why did it fail? Perhaps due to the lack of a successor capable of matching Cromwell. Perhaps due to the inability to reconcile rival religious and political factions. Perhaps due to the unpopularity of the Puritan regime and military rule. Or perhaps simply because the monarchical tradition was too deeply ingrained in the English psyche to be erased in just a decade. The Restoration brought back the crown, but it didn't erase the scars of the Civil War, nor the fundamental questions about power, religion, and freedom that it raised. Questions that would continue to haunt Great Britain for a long time to come. Was the King's return truly a solution, or just a postponement of future conflicts? Was the Restoration a triumph of tradition, or a failure of the Revolution? What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey through the political rollercoaster of 17th century England, don't forget to subscribe for more stories where power dramatically changes hands. Until next time,